This is an inset Ventricosa morellii, and they're not frost hardy. They'll only go down to freezing. -2 will kill them if it's a ground frost. An air frost, sometimes they can withstand it, but they need to be taken indoors or protected from the frost. This one I've got here is big enough to dry store. So I'm digging him out, I'll turn him upside down to drain the water off, and then I'll put him in my shed in the dark at 5 degrees centigrade. I normally just wedge them into a plant pot, no soil, compost or anything, cover them in sulphur powder to try and prevent any rot, and just leave them there over the winter. If you can still get both hands round them, if you form like you're sort of try to strangle it and you can get both hands round them comfortably, then they're really a bit too small to dry store. Keep these plants indoors and treat them as you would an ordinary houseplant over the winter. This is a tree fern, it's Dicksonia antarctica, and they're native to Tasmania and southeast Australia. The temperatures they're used to there, they get a summer temperature of between 16 and 22 degrees centigrade. The nights are often cool though, it's warm but very rarely that hot there. And the average winter temperatures are between 3 and 10 degrees centigrade. Occasionally they'll get a high of 28 to 32, but only for short period. Rarely goes below -2. But the main thing is they have a lot of rainfall and they have high humidity. Now these are the conditions that we're trying to replicate in the UK when growing tree ferns. And in the winter they really won't withstand our really cold winters. If we get the temperature between +5 and -2, they're generally safe, unprotected. The fronds remain intact and the crown is unaffected. Between -3 and -5, the crown begins to feel the cold and the fronds may go brown or collapse, and it's recommended to give a light protection of fleece or a crown sort of stuffing to keep them safe. Now when we get a UK temperature between -6 and -8, this is very dangerous for unprotected plants. The crown can be permanently damaged and the trunk may freeze and disrupt the water flow, and heavy wrapping is really essential. Now when it gets to the bad temperatures of -8, which we don't get very often here, there's a high risk of losing the plant without strong protection. The crown and trunk can freeze solid and die. And prolonged freezing at any level between -4 and -6 is harmful. Repeated freeze-thaw cycles tend to damage the crown and the developing fronds, and any moisture trapped in the crown increases the risk of frost damage. I'm in USD zone 9A, a normal winter temperature of -5 to -10. We don't normally get -10s here very often. I'm in quite a sheltered position down here. I'm under trees. So I only tend to protect the top part of the trunk. The top 2 feet I tend to wrap in Hessian sacks, and I put a couple round it, and I extend it a little bit above the actual brown trunk so it goes a little bit up the fronds, and that way I can stuff more straw into the top. So I clear all of the wet mushy leaves out that is accumulated in the autumn, and I stuff the top with about 4 to 6 inches of dry straw. Now I don't bother covering it with anything to keep the rain off, because the straw, it dries out pretty well when you get a wind. If there was snow in there I take it off. Now the fronds themselves, some people tie up. I tend to leave them. You can tie them up, which will help them, but it's very, very awkward to do that, and I think actually they're probably going to die off anyway, so I just leave them. Whatever you do, do not cut those fronds off, because what happens is the weight of the fronds tends to keep the top open so that when you get the new knuckles, the new shoots, they've got a big opening to go up and you get the bigger leaves. If you cut the leaves off, that top will constrict and you'll get less leaves, smaller leaves and a smaller spread. Some people protect the roots of these, which are actually in the ground, with a heavy mulch and protect the whole trunk. And if we was going to get sort of -12 or -15, I'd be panicking and would be covering the whole thing in fleece or whatever I could throw around it to try and keep it warm. But this is what I've done for the past couple of years, this end result here, and it has worked. My smaller tree ferns I dig up and put in this polytunnel, which is very sheltered. It's a polytunnel that we put up in the winter and it's contained within our jungle hut, so it's got a double protection really. And I stuff the crowns with straw, and if it gets really cold I'll put some fleece over all of these in here, and hopefully that will get them through the winter. This is our Misobastu bananas. We don't have to be quite so fastidious on watching the temperatures with these because you've got a bit of leeway. They stop growing at around about 12 degrees centigrade and you'll get some leaf damage at 0, but you're going to lose those leaves anyway, so you don't have to worry so much about the leaves. But it's the pseudostem that you want to try and save. A small one will die just a few degrees below freezing, but these thicker ones here, well, these are sort of intermediate ones. But if you've got one that's say 4 to 6 inches, that'll maybe go down to sort of -6, -8, something like that. But it will die at those temperatures. If the pseudostem, the main trunk, dies, then it will start growing from the ground the following year, because the roots are pretty hardy. They'll go down to -8, -10, and they can stick that for quite a while. So the following year, if you've lost the pseudostem, then you'll be growing from the ground again, and you have to wait for them to grow that stem. So most people, they try to save that stem so it grows from the top and you've got the height fairly instantly, and it will grow from there and you get a much bigger plant. So the idea is to, when you start thinking that you're going to get some hard frosts, is to wrap that stem in something. Some people, they just wrap some fleece around it and hope for the best on that. But I've got this sort of grove here, and I find the easiest way is to wrap it all as one thing and get a builder's bag, cut the bottom out and slide that over the top, and then stuff that with straw. And I've used this for a few years, and the method does seem to work quite well. This year the grove is bigger than ever, so even a builder's bag won't go over the whole grove. So on the outer ones I just use bin liners, cut the top out of those and stuff those with straw. Now, one thing you don't want to do with these is wrap them with bubble wrap, because they do tend to sweat, and one thing that you might get is the stems rotting. And with the straw, it does tend to sort of keep them fairly dry and stays fairly dry within it. And if you get a bag of straw, the straw I took out of this last year, I've stored in a separate bag up by my greenhouse. And I went to it this year, and only now, less a whole year later, it's had the whole year, has some of the middle parts started to rot, and some of the outer parts of the straw are completely untouched. I use new straw every year and just leave the old straw to hopefully rot down eventually, and then I can put it on the beds. Now these cannas I'm digging up, I'm not leaving any in the ground now. I've left some in the ground. We had some wonderful Turkheimis that we left in the ground, and they all died. So I'm having them all up now. And these ones I think are muscifolias. They get quite big, so we just dig them all out and split them if you want to separate them if they got a bit too bulky, and cut the tops off, cut all the foliage off. You don't need that. Label them and pot them up we just pot them up in any old soil really, because the following year we're going to, as soon as they start shooting, we're going to have them in the ground. So you don't have to be too fussy if it's old compost or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But they need to be kept frost free. Now, as regards to the solanums and the other big foliage plants, which are sort of annuals, we're going to try a few of them in the ground, because some of them we've heard can, on a very mild winter, get through. So what we're doing, we're like this one, I'm going to dig this one out and save this one, cut it down so it's a reasonable size, and then pot that up and stick it in the greenhouse. But we're going to leave a few actually in the garden, because we've been very surprised to read online that some of the things that we've been fanatical about saving, some people have out all year. Obviously we're not I live in a little village, it's a little bit of a frost pocket here. It's always a couple of degrees lower than the main town. We do have to be wary, but we're going to give it a go. This is Solanum lacinatum, the kangaroo apples, and we've had a few frosts, and it's still hanging in there. We're leaving this one in the garden. It's still got some fruit on there, but it hasn't obviously ripened. But we're leaving a few of these in the garden to see how they fare, because I've heard that they're actually, some people get these through the winter. So I've got one here, and I've got one down the bottom there. And it's not the only thing that we're leaving in as a trial, because we've got some of these which we've taken cuttings from, and we're going to, that bee has lost. We've got some of these which we're taking cuttings from, so we've got some smaller plants which we'll plant out next year, but we'd like to leave a big one in and see just as an experiment, to see what happens to it. Now with the beauties, I'm just going to cover this bit here with straw to try and protect this bottom bit. Can't do anything with the leaves, they're too big, but hopefully just protect this tip down here. Now what I'm trying with this Etium, I put these 4 canes in, and I'm going to put some fleece on the top of here, and then drop a bag over the top on the really cold nights to hopefully protect him, because he's starting to go a little bit black on top. These are okay, but I'm really desperate to keep this. Now most people will lose the top leaves of their tetrapanaxes no matter how big they are, but it's this stem that you really want to try and save. Now this will only go to between -3 and -8, and we've had other years where we've lost the stem and it's had to start growing from the base again. Now the roots are hardly down to -10 to -12, but what I'm going to do this year, I'm going to try and protect the stem of this and my other one that we've got out in the garden. I'm going to try and protect it by using some of this. I'm going to wrap some of this around it, and it's just a hessian sack, and it does help. I've got some of this around my tree fern, but it does help to try and preserve that stem, so that hopefully he'll grow from here next year.